Hello everyone and welcome back to the DM side. In today's video we are looking at the first section of the monsters in the brand new Van Richtens guide to Ravenloft. Great campaign setting. I'm already really enjoying reading through the book. If you would like to get a copy of your book, then go down and use the affiliate links below or head over to your local game store. As always, like, subscribe, share the video with a friend, but let's get straight into the monsters. So, jumping straight into it, we have our monsters of Ravenloft. There's a little blurb there to mention the untold terrors that haunt the domains of the dread. Among them, skulk nightmares known on countless worlds. As we know, there are many domains, so it can definitely become a mystery map of where to go next and what creatures could appear where. I'm really enjoying the artwork. This one is absolutely terrifying. I instantly think of Blinksky's shop in The Curse of Strahd. However, there is a domain of dread for things that are puppeteering. So I'm a big fan of this. I don't want to linger on the art too much. Now, I really enjoyed this section to begin with. Before we get into the actual monsters, the horror monsters, it gives you ideas on how you can not only create your own monsters, but also actually boost ones that your players may be comfortable with seeing more often now. And it gives you a little blurbs to explain how you may introduce a more horror theme into your campaign. So I really like the monsters' origins, so giving the origins their actual really deep backstory, just like your player characters would have. So that way, when your player characters figure out who these monsters are and where they came from, it actually means more to them, as well as to giving them a really detailed backstory in terms of maybe there are myths and legends that they hear along their travels. Then you have your notorious monsters, which is exactly that. Your monsters could have a reputation that precedes them, so that way your players are hearing about it, it's foreboding, and obviously they are slowly but surely coming into contact with these creatures. Then you have your describing your monsters. It gives a nice little example as to how to describe this creature here, which is the Whistling Fiend. It's obviously already very disturbing to see, but it has a notorious background. It has got a reputation due to the whistle that it makes, as well as being able to describe its features. Now, here it also mentions that you could describe the elements of the creature that are likely to provoke a visceral response, such as the smells of rotting flesh, the actual look of what looks to be an ooze or a goo that comes off of the body, the fact that it looks like it can hold its own heart, it has this hook that looks like a sickle, I believe the pronunciation is. It's a really interesting way to boost just your storytelling as a DM. After that, it goes on about monstrous tactics. So knowing that your monsters, they can also engage in battle in a smarter way. You obviously have monsters that have a low intelligence, they're more bestial, and so they just kind of go for the biggest thing that is a threat. Or in the vice versa, you could actually have them go, and it mentions it here, going after creatures that have less armor on them, so because their fleshy bits are more exposed. And that's what some of these more bestial creatures actually want. And so that's how you can really justify having your monsters attack your wizards, your bards, your more squishy players that kind of hang back. Finally, monster traits, mixing and matching things around. This one is a bit of a take with a grain of salt. It's not about just taking all the best bits of a monster, putting them into this weird monstrosity that you would like to create that may be completely unbalanced. However, if your players are at a level where you need to have things that are ridiculously outbalanced because they are very powerful, by all means go for it. But I like the examples such as traits like the troglodyte's chameleon skin or a doppelganger's ambusher can help make monsters feel more sinister. You could use the night hag's etherealness or giving a creature the ability to turn invisible, such as what the imps have. On top of that, you can obviously look at any other creature that you really like. One of my favorite creatures that I really would like to change and add and use an ability from is the Nothic, and the Nothic's eye being able to see into one of your player characters' backstories and pull that information from them without them wanting to. I've always had this idea of putting a Nothic's eye on a wizard's staff of some kind, so that way it can see into their backstory and get more insight on my players. After that, we have these are called in the Land of the Mist, many monsters serve as minions, and so they kind of get a benefit for being a minion. They could have something like an alien mind, so if your players try to pry into their minds to get information from them, they can make a saving throw, and if they fail the saving throw, then all of a sudden they can take some damage. After that, you've got things like your monster's minions can't be compelled to work in a way that is contrary to their master's instructions, which could be really interesting if your players are trying to persuade a creature or an enemy to side with them. There may be an actual magical connection between their master and themselves where they can't actually make that choice, and it could maybe be painful for them, or it could also be a problem for your players later down the track where they would be lying quite well to hide this fact. You have things like sacrificial minions. I really like when you're in those larger battles. When a minion dies, its master regains hit points equal to 4 times its challenge rating. That can be a really great way to continue the battle going on if your players are very strong. However, you don't want to just give them a lot of hit points. You would actually rather put more minions down and let them decide if they're going to deal with the minions or not. Then there are a few other really great ones there. Things like your selfless bodyguard. When an attack hits its masters and the minion is within 5 feet, the minion can use a reaction to make an attack for itself. So almost kind of like legendary actions, but for the minions themselves for being in the presence of their master. And then finally, the telepathic minion, which I think is probably one of my favorite ones because I enjoy creatures being able to communicate with their masters from a great distance, because then that can explain your BBEG having tabs on your players rather than you being the DM saying, oh, they just figured it out somehow. No, they are connected to their minions regardless of distance. One of my favorite things with Curse of Strahd is that he was connected to the land itself, and really you could just mention and talk about how Strahd is kind of all-knowing because he understands and feels everything that's going on in Barovia. Moving on, you have creating unique nightmares, and they talk through this example of creating this horrifying creature known as the Bagman. Now, this creature started off, for example, they start off with the idea of a troll. They wanted to make it an ambusher. They wanted to make it more grotesque, more freakish, and eventually they came up with this idea of giving it these certain traits where it could travel through items and impose itself upon the bearer of a bag, for example. Eventually giving it a grappler trait of a mimic, and then also the amorphous trait of a black pudding. And eventually, here it is, the Bagman. And then they give you a bit of a story here about how it happens. It is a fantastic creature. It's very cool. I'm a really big fan of it. Have a read of it when you get a chance. It definitely gives a great example of creating an urban legend and a horror-themed monster from previously made monsters already. Now, let's get straight into this list of creatures. We're going to go through A to J, and then in the next video, we will make our way through K to Z. The very first creature we have is the Body Plant. This is a very interesting creature because I'm not a big fan of plant monsters in particular, but I absolutely love it. It's a huge plant that has this almost zombified creature that is stuck inside of it. And these look like they are either eyes or mouths. It has 5 tentacles that span its body. Now, one of the most amazing things about this creature is that it is actually really terrifying. It can grapple up to 4 creatures, and then after that it can also start using its Vine Lash on your player. If they are grappled and they suffer acid damage from this attack from their entrapping pod, then they are, 1, restrained, they are stunned, and once they're trapped inside of it, nothing can really break them out of it except killing the creature that created it, such as this plant creature right here, or spending time to pull them out, as in with strength checks and breaking them free. Your players who are stuck inside need to make a Constitution saving throw of 16, which is quite high, even though Con is not a dump stat. On top of that, if they are trapped in, they don't require air anymore while they're in there. They gain a level of exhaustion. They are stunned and restrained, and if they are in there for each hour it spends in the pod, if the target dies while they're inside of it, immediately they emerge from the pod as a living podling, carrying or wearing all of the original creature's equipment. So they literally are Bodytaker Plants. They take the body of your players. They are pretty horrifying and a really interesting way to create a town of bodies that are possessed by plants. This reminds me a lot of the Intellect Devourers and how they can take the body and host inside of it. Now, again, you can break free with a successful DC 15 check. If the plant dies, the target is no longer restrained and can escape from it. And I love this little bit here where it says that they escape by spending 10 feet of movement, exiting prone. So it really does make that you get that visual of them crawling out of this gooey slime egg thing where your players are just covered in it. It's almost like Alien. Like think of any creature coming out of an egg, and that's what I'm imagining right now. They do get their multi-attack. They are able to rejuvenate, so when the plant dies, it returns to life in the place where it died in 1d12 months. should the area, the ground, not be salted or soaked with poison. So these creatures can actually come back, which is really terrifying, very interesting. They have deep speech. They're definitely not stupid creatures at all. They have telepathy, which I love, so they can communicate with your players. And so there isn't just this, oh, that's a big monster, let's go kill it. No, these things are intelligent. Moving on, we do have our podlings. Podlings are Bodytaker Plants, either capture unsuspecting victims with their vines or accept captives brought to them by their podling servants. So over a course of hours, the creature is dissolved inside and the body is repurposed into a podling duplicate. Podlings are near perfect mimics of the creature that they've replaced. However, similar to a doppelganger, they lack some information depending on how long the doppelganger has spent watching them and taking in their mannerisms. Now, this is a really interesting creature because I love the podling behavior, that table that they give you. So this is something that the podling will do, which can give away information that they have taken over the body, that the body is not of the original person. So the podling abandons the habits and the hobbies of the creature that it's mimicking, or the podling lavishes in affection on plants and houseplants and views them with excessive sympathy. So I love these options here that you can use as a way to reveal that there is something wrong. Now, in terms of that, using their stat block over here, the semblance of life is how that we see the podling. It's a physical copy of a creature that has been digested by the Bodytaker Plant. The podling has digested the creature's memories and behaviors like the creature, and behaves like the creature, but with occasional lapses. An observer familiar with the digested creature can recognize the discrepancies. However, should you not be familiar with it, you'll need to make a DC 20 wisdom check, or you'll automatically realize that there's something wrong if you know them well enough and they go completely against their morals or their ways of thinking. So say it's a guard of the city and they've always been dedicated to protecting the city. All of a sudden they would have a complete shift where they now want to leave the city and they don't care about it, even though it's been their life goal to maybe become the captain or the head guard of the entire town. And so that would be a clear indication something is wrong. You wouldn't even need to make the check anymore. Moving on, we have, this thing is horrifying, a Boneless. So these are animated corpses, however, they don't have their bones. These creatures are disgusting and horrifying. They leap up and wrap themselves around their enemies and slam into them and try and break them and suffocate them. These have an awesome backstory where they have actually, basically, it's any creature that's died that has been resurrected through necrotic means, and they were maybe crushed in their past life or they were skinned alive, and this one looks as if though it was skinned alive. I'm very interested as to how the hair lasts, but the more I look at this image, the more disgusted I feel. These creatures are not extremely dangerous, however, they are just awesome. They're really cool creatures. They basically are another level of like your skeletons, your animated bodies, your zombies, things like that. They do get a multi-attack, they get 2 slams, they can grapple by wrapping their boneless bodies around their enemies. They have dark vision, they can't be charmed, exhausted, frightened, things like that. They have a crushing embrace, which is what I was talking about before. They're able to wrap their bodies around a large or small creature. They grapple it while the boneless is attached. The target is blinded for one, and it's unable to actually breathe, so they start suffocating. Then the target also has to make a strength saving throw, and at the start of each turn, at the start of the boneless turns, or takes 1d4 bludgeoning damage. If something moves the target, the boneless will move with it. The boneless can detach itself if it really wants to. A creature, including the target, can use its action to try and detach the boneless from their friend and force it to move into a nearer or unoccupied space, doing so with a strength check as well. They are freakish, but amazing creatures. Then you have your brain in a jar. Now, I'm pretty sure a few pictures of this were circulating on the internet just before this came out, and it's a very interesting creature because I thought it was going to be more related to the illithid, but it seems that it's really not. Through rituals of combining alchemy, necromancy, and grim surgical precision, the brain of a mortal being is encased in a glass jar. So it's actually probably got more to do with the body horror that is inside of the domains of dread. Now, the transformation renders the brain ageless and imbues it with psionic powers, so it does have that similarity to the illithid, and you could probably put these in illithid laboratories of sorts inside your campaign. A brain in the jar can speak without vocal cords using its psychic abilities. It also likes to think out aloud. It basically speaks to itself. Getting to the stat block, here it is. This is our brain in a jar. It is pretty much kind of what you expect. Brain in a jar. Now, the jar doesn't always have to be this unique. It does say that they can be ornamental, they can just be standard jars. Just depends on who has made this this creature. Now, they are a challenge rating 3. I do really enjoy that they have a blind sight of 120 feet. They are able to use something called Detect Sentience. So within this, they also know a language they knew in their past life. Detect Sentience is when the brain can sense the presence of a location of any creature within 300 feet that has an intelligence of 3 or higher, regardless of interposing barriers. So anything like mind shielding, rings, and things like that, it doesn't actually matter. The creature that can be protected from this piercing thought essentially is anything that is under the effect of a mind blank spell only. So that is really cool, and it's going to be a really great way to scare your players who think that their minds are protected through magical means. It's resistant to magical spells. Obviously, it doesn't need to drink or sleep. It can use mostly magical attacks, so Chill Touch to protect itself. It has a Mind Blast where it bursts out a psionic wave. You make an intelligence saving throw, so that'll be really good against your barbarian bears, I guess you could say. It does do psychic damage as well, so these are really cool creatures to use against the bear barbarian. On top of that, it does come with a spell list here, so Charming Person, Haunting Person. What I really like about it is that these creatures are kind of looking for a new body, essentially. So it does mention back up here, transformation renders the brain ageless. A brain can speak, conversations, depending on its creator, still other brains desire nothing more than to regain a body. This might be the brain's original body, another frame they covet, or some more elaborate design of their own diabolical creation. So you could have it try and take your players' bodies, similar to the Intellect Devour. Next, we have the Carrion Stalker. Carrion Stalkers are very similar to the Carrion Crawlers, and they actually live almost peacefully together. Basically, the way that Carrion Stalkers reproduce is they have these maggots that get spread around. The Carrion Crawlers pick them up, carry them around, and place them and spread them around the world for these disgusting creatures to spawn. Now, one of my favorite things about these creatures is they can actually, a Carrion Stalker begins its life as a larva, so not a maggot, but same thing. Over the course of a few weeks, it does grow into this disgusting creature, and from there, the havoc begins. More than one necromancer has animated a corpse infested with a Carrion Stalker's larvae, and so while the corpse, the zombie, moves around, it actually, in battle, will burst from the zombie, and then you have this Carrion Stalker to deal with in battle. The zombie is killed and completely useless, however, your players now have to deal with this much more disgusting, terrifying, more challenging creature. Here it is in all of its beautiful glory. It kind of looks like a crab or some kind of sea urchin. It's very, very interesting. Moving on to its stat block, it's a tiny monstrosity. It has a multi-attack. It can use its tentacles to do piercing damage. Carrion Stalker then attaches to the target and pulls itself into the target's space. While it's attached, the Carrion Stalker moves with the target, and it has advantage on the attacks made against it. So a creature can also use its action to try and detach itself from the Stalker, using and force it to move into a near occupied space. You need a strength check for that. Now, here's the big one, the Lava Burst. The Carrion Stalker releases a burst of lava within a 10-foot radius centered on itself. The creature in the area needs to succeed on a DC 13 con saving throw. It'll be poisoned if they fail, and a creature that's poisoned takes damage at the start of each of its turn as the larvae infest its body. So your players can have larvae infesting the inside of their bodies, and it just gets worse. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. Now, any effect that cures the disease or removes a poison, so things that like what your paladins can do, condition instantly kills the larvae inside the creature. However, if the creature, the player, is reduced to 0 by the infestation, they die, and then the larvae remain inside the corpse, and eventually over 1d4 weeks, they grow, one of the larvae grow into a new Carrion Stalker, unless the body is destroyed and all the larvae are killed off as well. Again, using something that can cure diseases or remove poisons. So you could have a whole town of these things just spawn up from the fact that they've infested the area, and people are just getting sicker and sicker, and they have these larvae inside of them. Finally, we move on to a creature that I think is just amazing. And I mean, like, I'm a big fan of horror things like this. After running Curse of Strahd, I absolutely fell in love with Blinsky. So this creature, the Carrionette, is terrifying. It is only a challenge rating of 1, however, it can cause a lot of problems for your players. Carrionettes arise from innocent intentions, heartfelt wishes, breathe life into beloved toys, and for a time, a creator might feel blessed by their new companion. However, the Carrionettes they aren't content with their life as a toy, and they seek to escape their bodies. Now, every Carrion possesses a silver needle, and we'll get a picture up. This needle holds their soul within the body of the toy, and this is the main piece of the Carrionette that we need to worry about. So, the Carrionette might appear as any type of toy or art. It doesn't have to be one of these creatures, these toys on a wheel. It can actually be a stuffed animal, or a bloodthirsty puppet, or a murderous jewelry box with a ballerina inside of it. Now, these malicious toys are skilled deceivers, and despite having have existed for generations, they often affect unsettling childlike personalities. Now, among the most notorious of these terrors is the Carrionette Maligno, the Dark Lord of the domain Odare. So you should look up that domain if you want to have freakish toys in your next campaign. Let's get into the stat block. Why is this creature so dangerous? If the Carrionette is motionless at the start of combat, it has advantage on its initiative roll, and then on top of that, if your players haven't observed it moving or doing anything, then your players need to make a successful DC 15 Wisdom saving perception check to discern that the Carrionette is actually animated at all. Now, it doesn't need air, food, drink, or water, things like that. It is a construct. Now, the Silver Needle is its primary weapon. It deals necrotic damage. And then on top of that, the target has to make a charisma saving throw or become cursed for a minute. While it's cursed in this way, the target speed goes down by 10 feet, so the creature can catch up to them as they're running from the building away from this disturbing monster. And it needs to roll a d4 and subtract the number rolled from each ability check on the roll it makes. So it's almost like a Bane effect. Then, on top of that, it has a swap effect for its soul. The Carrionette targets a creature that they have cursed by its needle, and unless the target is protected from a protection from evil or good spell, it needs to succeed on another charisma saving throw or have its consciousness swapped with the Carrionette. So they swapped souls, which I think is insane. Now here is the biggest problem for your players. This thing controls the body, it has its regular stats, it doesn't have their abilities, their class features, proficiencies, whatever. However, if the Carrionette's body is destroyed, both the Carrionette and the target die. Unless your player is protected from the protection from good and evil spell, then they are going to die when this toy is destroyed. And most players would generally think if we kill the toy, then our player gets their body back. That's usually kind of the quick fix in games like this. So it's going to be really interesting how this plays out. It's a challenge rating 1, but it's a dangerous creature. Now, the swap is also undone if the controlled body takes damage from the Silver Needle again. So players could get the Silver Needle from the player characters trapped in the body, and they could use it, or they could just throw the toy at the enemy and hope that it hits them. It's a very interesting creature, super dangerous, very disturbing and creepy. I can't wait to put my players inside of a toy shop which is filled with all these souls trapped in these toys. Next, we have the Death's Head. These creatures are disembodied flying heads, which I'm really excited for. Think about the creatures, the headless skeletons from the Breath of the Wild when I think of these creatures. However, they have very specific types of heads. Now, one with a head of a monster like a Nothic or a Medusa, though retains a measure of the power it had in life and can befuddle the minds of petrifying the bodies of its victims. So, for example, we have the beheaded form, obviously, where the creature, when created, a death's head takes one of the three forms, the aberrant head, the gnashing head, or the petrifying head, which then dictates their actions. The gnashing head does piercing necrotic damage, so I feel like that's a bit of an easier one to deal with. Then you have your mind-bending bite. This is for the aberrant head only. Now, it deals piercing damage plus necrotic damage, and the target needs to make an intelligence saving throw, or it can't take an action until the end of its next turn. On top of that, on its next turn, the target must choose whether it gets to move, have an action, or a bonus action, and it only gets one of the three. So I really like that limitation on players. You can do something, but you can only do one of your regular things. Finally, the petrifying bite. It's pretty much in the name. Make a constitution saving throw, and if you fail, you begin to turn to stone, which is obviously your Medusa head style. The target needs to repeat the saving throw on the next turn, and if it fails, well, you're petrified. To make this more terrifying, the Death's Head can create a tree of themselves. Basically, it is a cursed wild area where an awakened tree has been planted, and it has 2d6 death heads hanging from it. Now, if the heads feel that the tree is threatened, they will detach and they will protect it. Should the tree be destroyed, the heads can actually scatter and plant themselves into the ground, creating an unholy ground, and on top of that, a new tree will be born within 1d12 months. So I really like that. So far, we have a few monsters where your players can destroy the creature. However, they can come back months later rather than a couple minutes later, where they're pretty much going to figure out, oh, well, we just have to do this, this, and this to destroy it for good. Such as a troll with fire, they can come back after death. I think it's within a few hours, whereas this is a monthly thing. This is like a whole year, so your players could forget about it, come back to a town that they originally thought they'd saved, and it's completely destroyed. Next, we have the Dullahan. Now, Dullahans are really strong, terrifying creatures. I really love this. This is a classic horror thing. A person that is a headless knight, essentially. They are headless undead warriors, the remains of villains who let vengeance consume them. These depicted hunters haunt the areas where they were slain, butchering innocents in search of their severed heads, or to quench their thirst for revenge. So I absolutely love it. These creatures basically are looking for their heads. So it could be a beheaded body of a creature or a knight or an enemy that your players killed long ago, and they have risen now as one of these ungodly things. They are wicked knights or commanders in life, and Dullahans adhere to the twisted codes of chivalry or soldiership. These fallen champions consider a specific location as their battlefield, and there are horror stories where they are said to be lurking on the battlefields of long past generational battles, and that if you get too close to the area, then you can become seen as an enemy and they will attack you. They can be seen to have followers with them. They're, let's say, their fallen soldier brethren. They come in the form of things like skeletons or wights, or even the terrifying mounts of a warhorse skeleton or a nightmare, similar to the one that Curse of Strahd, that Strahd himself rides. Now, the Dullahan has a legends table, so you can roll to see what it is exactly that they want. So a Dullahan pursues anyone who has one of the shards of its shattered head. So maybe they took it, made like a shark tooth, made a necklace out of a piece of his destroyed or her or their destroyed head, and here we are. They're now seeking to get it back and piece it together. Perhaps they are vain and pursue their own relatives, seeking to claim the head of the family from their generations. On top of that, they could just be greedy and they actually want the bejeweled helmet that their head once wore, and they wish to have it back. Or there's two of them, which I really like, claiming the same head because they believe they're the actual owner. Now, these creatures are a challenge rating of 10, and for good reason. First of all, they have headless summoning, which recharges after a long or a short rest, where they can actually summon death heads to be their servants and to help them along in their battles. Now, should you do this, it actually creates a much more different landscape of battle. They are no longer really a challenge rating of 10. They actually have access to extra legendary actions, which has been written here as mythic actions, which I really like. And so if you defeat them, you get more XP if you're running XP. Basically, I think if you are not running XP and you're running a milestone sort of styled game that I prefer to run, chances are you're going to level them up after they defeat this creature. So when they die and go to 0, they actually don't fall unconscious. They come back with 97 hit points, so not full, but more than half, and they get 3 death heads, generally probably one of each kind, or if you're really mean, you could pick 3 of each of the kind and make it super hard. Now they do have legendary resistance, 2 of them per day. They get a multi-attack, they make 2 attacks with their battle axe, and this is where things get really interesting and a little bit scary for your players, because should the Dullahan score a critical hit against a creature, the target has to make a Constitution saving throw. If they fail that con saving throw, the Dullahan cuts off the target's head. The target dies if it can't survive without a lost head, which I'm pretty sure is for most of the player characters in D&D. But that is a really interesting mechanic, because at the end of the day, we're used to these 3 death saving throws. This is an insta-kill, very similar to a Wraith taking the life force from a player. It can feel a little bit cheap, so DMs really need to be careful when you're using this type of creature. It is super strong, so your players are probably at a point where they are pretty strong, and they've accepted the fact that death saving throws may not always come into the fold. Now, it does have 3 legendary actions, which you can use just like any other legendary actions. Frightful Presence, so creating a fear wisdom saving throw on your players. The Headhunt, where the Dullahan moves up to its speed without getting opportunity attacks on it, and it makes an attack against the player near it. Here's the thing, it makes an attack with advantage if the attack hits but is not a critical, it deals 68 necrotic damage. If it does hit, it will possibly move into this Constitution saving throw with its battle axe. Now, the mythic actions, which I like, it's a different thing. It's something that happens after they have been killed, whereas they come back to life. I want to see more of this with more creatures. The Dullahan can obviously summon up its death heads, and then it does a coordinated assault. It's where the Dullahan makes a battle axe attack, and then one of the death heads gets an extra attack that they can see, where they can see a creature within 30 feet. Or for 2 actions, for 2 costs, the Headless Wail. An echoing shriek issues from the Headless Stump, which I think is just gross. Each creature has to make a saving throw, wisdom, and if they fail, they take 3d10 psychic damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. If one or more creatures fails the saving throw, the Dullahan gains 10 temporary hit points. So these things are really hard to put down. This really could be, I mean, it could be the whole point of a campaign for your players, to hunt down this legendary creature, this mythical horror story that is actually terrorizing towns. Or on the flip side, it could be a servant to your BBEG, and this is just the next step, one more before the final battle, which could be really terrifying for players. Moving on, we have the Gallows Speaker. This creature has a really cool backstory. I'm a really big fan of it. Obviously, I'm a fan of all the creatures, apparently, but this one I really think has a lot of good storytelling, because Gallows Speakers arise from places of mass death, or sites where creatures regularly meet their doom. Now, over time, these pan-racked phantoms and lingering souls combine themselves, so it's these souls that are lost, I guess you could say, and they haven't found their way to move on. However, they haven't become skeletons and zombies and things like that. They actually, the souls combine themselves into an entity that knows death in a myriad of forms. So they've died in multiple different ways, and so their souls are tarnished and tortured, and so they mix into this deathly, it looks like the Grim Reaper basically, into this. And I love the picture for this, because look at that. You can see all these souls inside the cloak all through it, and it just twists and goes or moves around the creature itself. Having known untold death, Gallows Speakers can actually predict suffering. They can foresee doom and dooms leveled against them, and overwhelming their foes with visions of innumerable violent deaths. Now, they don't really speak coherently or communicate with the living. They're actually instead being entirely obsessed with their memories of their death, that if a player should listen in, they can actually gain insight into how these souls died in multiple different ways. And it could be a really interesting moment for players who are trying to get information but can't speak with the creature. Sure, they try and speak with it, they really do mumble and push on with how they died, and it can be a bit of a hassle trying to figure out the information. But it is not impossible. Now, moving on to the stat block, they are resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical attacks, they can't be hurt by necrotic or poison, and they're basically immune to any condition that we all have. Top of that, they have True Sight, which I think is awesome. True Sight is a really interesting mechanic that doesn't get used enough in your lower level creatures. I know it's a challenge rating 6, but I would still consider this relatively lower level, because it's around your mid-level campaigns in the official books. So True Sight is really fun to play around with, and it has any of the languages that its spirits knew. So you could just have this thing know all languages, so it can always speak and talk with any of your players. Now, what abilities do they have? Divination senses. The Gallows Speakers can see 60 feet into the ethereal plane when it's on the material plane, and vice versa. The Gallows Speaker can move through other creatures, similar to a ghost. If it stops, it'll take damage when it stops inside of a creature or inside of an object. It doesn't need air, food, all that stuff. Actions, it can deal psychic damage with its foretelling touch, and the target needs to roll a d4 and subtract the number rolled for the next attack roll. So as if though it's foretelling the pain that they will take by giving them more of a chance to fail. A very minimal bane effect. Then they have their Suffering Echoes. The Gallows Speaker targets a creature it can see within 30 feet. The target must make a saving throw, wisdom. On a failed save, the target takes 3d12 psychic damage, and a wave of painful memories leap from the target into up to 3 other creatures that the Gallows Speaker can see within 30 feet of the target. Each takes 3d8 psychic damage. So I love that attack. I think it's so cool. First of all, you hit your player and then pain and memories from their lives spring forth and attack their party members. The visual on that I think is amazing. This is a cool creature for any horror themed campaign that you are running. It's probably one of my favorites so far. Next up we have the Gremishka. Now Gremishka are interesting creatures. They look like little rat things. They're small creatures. They have a really interesting backstory. They have been created through foul experiments from spellcasters, and so they seek out spell books and spell components. They seek out familiars and things like that to eat them, to take in their magical essence. They are actually very intelligent creatures. They have a +1 to their int. They are always looking to foil a spellcaster's plans, and they actually might imitate the sound of whimpering children or wounded animals to coax victims to come closer into tighter quarters. And one of my favorite things is that if you actually attack them with magic, things happen. I love when wild magic surges basically happen. So looking at their stat block, if a magic, they have a thing called a magic allergy. Once a day, immediately after a creature within 30 feet of the Gremishka casts a spell, it can spontaneously react to the magic. Roll a d6 to figure out what happens. 1 to 2, the Gremishka emanates magical energy. Each creature within 30 feet of it must succeed on a con saving throw or take 1d6 force damage. 3 to 4, the Gremishka surges with magical energy and regains 1d6 hit points. And 5 to 6, which is probably the worst one, the Gremishka explodes and dies. And a swarm of Gremishka instantly appears within the space where it died. The swarm uses the same initiative of the creature. So really cool creature. It is weaker. It's a fun one. You throw a couple in a sewer or something like that, and you're going to have a lot of fun. However, the swarm does act differently. It doesn't have the same magical abilities, I guess you could say, as the original. So looking at it, keeps pretty much all the same stats. They are strong because they're a swarm now. They've got 24 hit points. They have a limited spell immunity, so a swarm automatically succeeds on saving throws against spells of 3rd level or lower, and the attack rolls of such spells always miss, which I think is really cool because a lot of spellcasters, I mean, they're not safe. They're definitely squishy, and if they get hit, they can die very easily, but it's really nice to know that this is going to cause a problem for your spellcasters who hang back all the time. Then obviously the swarm can occupy another creature's space and just kind of crawl over them, similar to a swarm of rats. They get biting attacks and things like that. They do force damage, which I think is really great, and if you kill half of them, they do half of the damage, basically. Finally, as a reaction, spell redirection. In response to a spell attack roll missing, which they all do when they're in a swarm form, they can actually cause the spell to hit another creature of their choice within 30 feet. So really interesting mechanics. You can have a lot of fun with it. Definitely try them out. Finally, we have a horrific creature. Let's get a picture of it. It is called the Jiangshi. Jiangshi, it looks like a vampire. It looks like a zombie. It looks terrifying. It looks like something from The Ring, and it is terrifying. So let's find out why. So, when a soul becomes trapped within its corpse, its bitterness can reanimate its body, creating a Jiangshi. These vengeful dead stalk their descendants and the communities they knew in life, sowing terror and taking retribution for slights or neglected burial rites that led to their cursed resurrections. These creatures are amazing because they have rich backstory. You can create a really good in-town story of fallen nobles, fallen peasants, fallen anybody really who weren't given their proper rights. Now, by day, they lurk within inside tombs and hidden in ruins to avoid the attention of the living, but at night, they emerge to drain the life from other creatures. They need this energy to sustain their freakish, unnatural existence, and by granting them these greater powers that they still maintain. Humanoids that are actually killed by Jiangshi rise as life-hungry corpses and might turn themselves into a Jiangshi should they feed upon the living. Now, let's take a look at the stat block. It is a challenge rating 9, and it is a doozy. So, the Jiangshi actually has weaknesses. I love that there is a weakness section. So, I get a lot of people asking in my games, a lot of my players asking, well, what is a creature's weakness? But a lot of them don't actually have a weakness. So, it's really nice to have something in here that does have a weakness. That isn't just something like, deals double, radiant damage is doubled. No, it has weaknesses, and they are fear of its own reflection. If it sees its own reflection, immediately it uses its movement to get as far away from that as possible. So carrying a mirror is very good. and it's susceptible to holy symbols. So if it's wearing one or it has one that is touching it in battle, it automatically is going to fail saving throws against turning the undead, which is awesome because that is something for clerics and paladins to really take advantage of. Now, what can it do? It has multi-attack, it can make 3 slam attacks, and it can use its consume energy attack. So 4 attacks all in one go. The slam attacks only do 2d8 bludgeoning damage, but if you have 4 of those hitting into one player, that can deal quite a lot of damage in the end. Then, consuming the energy, the Jiangshi draws energy from a creature it can see within 30 feet of it. The target needs to make a con saving throw of 16, which is pretty high, and if it fails, it takes 4d8 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much on a success, which is great. The Jiangshi regains hit points equal to the amount of necrotic damage that it dealt, which is awesome. After regaining the hit points from this action, the Jiangshi gains the following benefits for 7 days. Now, its original speed of 20 feet changes to 40 feet, and it also gets a flying speed equal to its walking speed, and it can hover, which is terrifying. At first, it just looks like a zombie. It's no big deal, guys. We got this. Now it flies and it moves 40 feet. Whoa, okay. Humanoid slain by this creature, however. A humanoid slain by this necrotic damage rises as a wight at the end of the Jiangshi's turn. The wight acts immediately after it on its initiative order. If the wight slays a humanoid with its life drain, the wight will then transform into one of these things in 5 days. One thing I find strange about this creature is this part here, the shape change. It just feels a little bit off. It feels a bit different compared to everything else that we just read. So it can polymorph into a beast, a humanoid, or an undead that is a medium or small, and back into its true form. Its statistics other than its size are the exact same. Any equipment it's wearing or carrying is obviously absorbed like normal polymorph. Yeah, and it reverts to its true form if it dies. I just think that was a weird addition for the creature because it just felt so removed from the horror that was happening. So I guess it can turn into a beast and leave if it wants to. It's very different, and it kind of feels tacked on there in the end just to make it a bit more challenging. So, I mean, I'm not against it. It's another ability it has, and it means it can probably live on and continue going, but it does feel like it's a little bit tacked on. Those are the monsters for the Van Richtens Guide to Ravenloft campaign setting A to J. Next video will be K to Z, where we finish them off. We've split it into 2 because, let's face it, there's a lot of monsters. It's going to be a really long video otherwise. So if you want to see the next video with the rest of them, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video. Click on these to entertain yourself until then, and I will see you in the next one.